Being World Refugee Day, and this day is observed to commemorate the strength, the courage, the perseverance of millions of refugees around the world. This year, World Refugee Day also marks a key moment for the public to show support for families forced to flee. To tell us a little bit more about how the South African government is observing this, we're joined in studio by the Minister of Home Affairs, Malusi Gigaba. Always good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much. It's, I think it's great to be here, particularly today.
Yeah, I mean, you saw this piece that we were playing there, that this team that will be participating in the Olympics. I mean, what do you think about that, all refugee team?
I think it's a message to all of us. I think it's quite commendable for the IOC to take this initiative to recognize refugees. You've got about 59.5 million refugees, internally displaced people and asylum seekers in the world today. It's the largest number of refugees in the history of humankind. It's about 20 million of those people are refugees, strictly speaking. And so it's quite a huge number of people who've been forced to flee their homes and seek refuge and asylum in other countries or in other places within their countries because of violence, persecution, and other reasons. And to have that type of intervention by the IOC, it becomes a message of hope that says we recognize you not only as victims, but also as people who can make a contribution, because sport is entertainment, it's recreation, it also brings hope. And so you will have a team of refugees that is going to be inspiring the world and contributing towards the entertainment of the IOC.
Yeah, I suppose so. With a name like the Team of Hope, I think that's exactly what it's all about. But let's move this refugee crisis home. And I mean, we look at South Africa's constitution, and we have an obligation in the department to the treatment of refugees here in South Africa. What is that obligation? What does our constitution say?
The South African constitution enjoins us to observe our international obligations, to treat refugees and asylum seekers in terms of our human rights culture and ethos, to protect them whilst in the country, to recognize the rights which they have, and offer them protection in the situation in which they find themselves. Accordingly, our Refugee Act and all our immigration policy is framed in such a manner that we can recognize those obligations. We have, as the UNHCR representative was saying in the news clip read earlier, one of the best refugee acts in the world. South Africa is one of the leading countries, not only on the continent but also worldwide, in terms of how it treats refugees, what our law says. We may be falling short in some instances in terms of the practice, but in terms of the law itself and the rights which we give refugees and asylum seekers, we are recognized worldwide as one of the leading countries with the most progressive legislation you will find anywhere in the world.
Yeah. And yet, I mean, we still are lagging very much so behind when it comes to the backlog of refugee applications and providing basic services for asylum seekers. Yeah, how is it going with the backlog? I mean, firstly, I suppose, before you answer that, how many refugees do you know of that we have here in South Africa?
South Africa has about 121,000 recognized refugees. Every year, we receive large numbers of asylum seekers. If you look at the period between in the mid-2000s, in the 90s, we were receiving up to the regions of 100,000 applicants per year. But over the last 3 years, in 2014, we had about 72,000 applications. In 2013, we had 72,000. 2014, we had about 70,000. Last year, we had about between 62 and 68,000. So the numbers are dropping because of the increasing efficiency at Home Affairs in determining asylum. Now, the problem is that what faces us in South Africa in large measure has been the fact that there is no other avenue for economic migrants to regularize their stay in the country. So what they do is to apply for asylum and make patently unfounded claims in order to be granted refugee status. Now, what that does is that it clogs up the asylum system and creates a situation in terms of which it becomes difficult to protect genuine asylum seekers, because their applications become overcrowded by the applications of those who are economic migrants. What we then are doing as the department is we are developing a new international migration policy framework. The green paper has been finalized, approved for public consultation by Cabinet, which will enable us to go out and consult with the public. We will now have a policy framework and eventually a legislation dealing with economic migrants, which would then enable us to be able to focus on asylum seekers properly. But there is no backlog we are dealing with at the present moment. We are able to adjudicate speedily all the cases that are presented before us. We're continuing to improve our systems, and with the changes that we are going to introduce at Marabastad and other refugee reception offices, we are going to have a much more efficient way of dealing with asylum management in the country.
So you say there's no backlog, that you're up to date with all of the refugees. I mean, because I'm just looking at what the South African Human Rights Commission is saying, and they're calling on the department to move faster on this backlog. So they're saying there is a backlog, and yet you're saying there isn't a backlog. Are you confident that there isn't one?
There is no backlog. What we have is large numbers of applications which we are being asked to adjudicate. Yes, we understand we need to adjudicate them quickly. Okay. And we try to adjudicate the cases before us within 3 months, and we have been doing that, and that's why we have seen the improvements in the management of asylum seekers. We are going to be presenting a report to Cabinet on the statistics we are dealing with, the numbers of applications vis-a-vis the numbers of cases that we've adjudicated. The numbers that are granted asylum after adjudication are far fewer than the numbers, these 60,000 numbers of applications that we are dealing with. So our management has improved drastically. I think we also have taken the steps that the various organizations like your Human Rights Commission, your UNHCR and other organizations which are dealing with similar cases, whenever they find that there is a case of a person which has not yet been finalized, they must bring that to our attention so that we deal with those issues as speedily as possible, because we are quite cognizant of our obligation to protect asylum seekers and genuine refugees.
I want to talk about the UNHCR because they are calling on governments to sign the #WithRefugees petition. Basically, it's asking governments to ensure every refugee child gets an education, ensure every refugee family has somewhere safe to live, and ensure every refugee can work or learn new skills to make a positive contribution to the community. Are we as a South African government signing this petition as well?
Well, we will be looking at the petition, and if we are satisfied with it, we will sign it. I think the biggest problem facing organizations such as the UNHCR relate to developed countries rather than developing countries, because where we are concerned, in terms of South African legislation, we already give asylum seekers the right to education, the right to work, the right to establish a business, the right to pursue a livelihood, and even the right to protection whilst in the country. So we've been leading in that regard. In a large measure, we could say that a lot of these campaigns and efforts are also based on the pioneering role that South Africa has played. As I say, we do find that there are gaps in some instances in regard to implementation. But we've been doing quite well as a country to recognize the rights of refugees, including the right to live where they choose to live and be protected whilst they are living there. And so in terms of the South African policy, the legislation, our practice, we've been doing quite well in recognizing these obligations and rights which refugees have.
Minister, we've run into news headlines, so I'm going to have to wrap it there. But at the same time, I'm just going to wish you luck today, because I do know that you've got a big day ahead of you. Bienvenue Shelter in Johannesburg, and also engaging representatives from the refugee community at the Catholic Archdiocese of Johannesburg is where you'll be found, and you'll be doing your work over there. So thank you so much, and we'll certainly be following you on the day and find out exactly how it goes on this World Refugee Day. Thank you so much for talking to us here on the program. That, of course, is Malusi Gigaba. He's our Minister of Home Affairs here in South Africa. As I